Why do police kill? According to Jeffrey Fagan, writer of the article Race and Reasonableness in Police Killings, police officers in the United States have killed over 1,000 civilians each year since 2013. As many of these killings have begun to occur under similar circumstances, scholars have renewed a contentious debate on whether police disproportionalities use deadly force against African Americans and other non-white civilians, and whether such killings reflect racial bias. As you may already be aware, this has been an ongoing question that nobody seems to have an answer to yet. It should not be a question in the first place, but it still exists throughout generations. Answers to these questions that my parents and grandparents still have no answers to, but were part of the questions about the actions of law enforcement officers. Are these certain officers provoked into taking these negative actions? There are rules for the use of excessive force, but are they really adhered to? All people have rights, and there is frankly no excuse for the implementation of any actions that violate such rights. Instead of these actions taken by such officers, there must be alternative methods in place. There are such methods. Instead of firing a gun at a potential suspect for allegedly fearing one's own life, why is there not the use of tasers more? Are enough actions performed to subdue such a potential suspect? Not every situation calls for the same use of the same type of force. It seems that society has also placed its footprint on these issues as well, where racial injustices are highly demonstrated during these recent times. But the shortfall is it the same as there are also some political pressures as well that reveal themselves as well, but to put even more pressure on the security that we are accustomed to. When politics step into to promote negative actions, that is equal to placing gasoline on a fire. Sometimes there needs to be common sense that overrides general sense. Just as companies, especially larger ones, there would need to be various methods of physical and psychological reinforcement training, but there seems to be lacking support for this type of training, whether it be through the eyes of the officers to feel no need to do, or just the ignorance to what its purpose would be. There is just too much in the form of segmentation within these methods and actions of law enforcement officers in various jurisdictions. The most notable event of police violence came in the nature and method of the murder of John Floyd by officers. Black suspects are more than twice as likely to be killed by police than are persons of other racial or ethnic groups. Especially, there are no other obvious circumstances during the encounter that would make these use of deadly force reasonable. Upon further review, what exactly did George Floyd do to excite police officers to take the actions that were taken? As far as I can see, his only so-called crime was that he was a black man in society. George Floyd did not show any firearms and did not confront multiple officers to a point where life was in jeopardy. But it was the officers who utilized excessive force within the abuse of power that society has placed upon them. So now, I pose this question. Did police needlessly murder George Floyd? It's one thing when the question is asked from one perspective, but when we ask the question from the other end, where we flip the script, then the other question is not, okay, ask, is it? When someone is offended by a question, they must be the ones who are creating the issue to begin with. Did police officers involved needlessly kill George Floyd? I would ask that one thinks long and hard before quick answers are given. There are those that don't think as much of the cause and effect of the actions of the officers. One perspective from Wilfred Riley was that George Floyd was brutally killed by police officers, probably murdered. In fact, in technical legal sense of the term, however, beyond that fact, which is virtually all people of good common sense, death has collapsed or seemingly likely to do so. The already standard account is that Floyd was killed by white cops in a very in a vicious display of pure racism. That the killing is evidence of patterns of institutional bias throughout policing in America itself, and that the riots following George Floyd's death represents an almost justified lashing out at the white society. All of these questions are outright false, and the mainstream media, which abandoned the previous frenzied narrative about COVID-19 for this order of one race war, bears great responsibility for presenting it. The officers that planted his knee and waited on the back of George Floyd's neck while placing his hands in his pockets like it was business as usual. How does one justify this type of behavior? George Floyd did not ask to be put down like a rabid dog. Then the other officers on the scene did not even blink an eye at the actions that were going on. And to make matters worse, they attempted to force those around the event to leave and not video. Why does one try to hide this? Why is these issues with preserving life? Why is there so many segmentations and racism that is accepted as the norm? Most of us are still waiting for those answers, but all that we are given are more questions. How does any person who is sworn to uphold the law and the rights of the civilians not need a man's cry for help? First glance at the situation would lead to many to believe that is based on the beliefs of non-black officers feel a sense of entitlement. In other words, the racist beliefs of the some have been given the opportunity to manifest itself. It was always in existence, but never given the spotlight to reveal itself without any consequence. Political views, social views, ignorant views are all examples of how George Floyd was needlessly taken away from us. No punishment, only allow for these negative views to fester like a pandemic or a disease. A slap on the wrist does not cut it. A change is not needed. It needs to be mandatory. We as a society must find the answers to this predicament. What will it take to stop the racial injustices and prejudice or ignorance? People must stand up to ask these questions that are being posed each and every day. George Floyd was never given the opportunity to speak up and speak out for the actions done to him, but it is the actions that are taken by the objective society that shouts out the answers that need to be heard. It is these members of society that must continuously rally and uphold protests. Do not feel scared or pressure from the outside pressures to not be able to take these actions. This country was built on the dreams and liberties for all, and it does not allow the ignorance of few to destroy the aspirations of many. When everything is said and done and the dust has settled, corrupt police officers must be held accountable. None are above the law. All it takes is for one bad officer to ruin the positive reputation of many. But these few should not be allowed to hide behind the badge and a gun. Clearly, this was a main circumstance that caused George Floyd's life. The voice of those that are in it and the right reasons far outweigh those that are in it for the wrong reasons. But the positives are never given the opportunity to spread word as it should be. Racial injustices have gone on long enough, plain and simple. All of the ignorance that has run rampant throughout society must end. Life is too precious to allow these to be taken unjustly. The outcry over George Floyd's death offers a window of opportunity. Now, if George Floyd was able to stand with society to be an advocate of what is right during life instead of through his death, then what would be a blessing for what we all deserve?